Run, river, run, run through the hills. Run, river, run to the sea. Run, river, run to your place beneath the sun. Run, river, run over me.
Hi, this is Jan Lewis. Welcome to be my guest. Today we have from Uxbridge, Susan Franz. And Susan is a professor. She's an historian in the Underground Railroad history. And Susan, welcome. Where did I read about you? You appeared in Uxbridge. Didn't you do a presentation there?
I have done a presentation there. I've also been on the select board there and the finance committee, and I'm currently on the historical committee there.
Yeah, and you gave a presentation. How, Susan, first of all, Susan isn't even from New England. She's from California. When did you move to this area?
I've been in Uxbridge for 21 years.
Oh, okay.
And in New England a little bit longer than that.
What started your interest in the Underground Railroad?
Actually, it was when I was on the select board in Uxbridge. One of our local historians, I didn't know a whole lot about it at the time, came to talk to me because we had a site in our community that was the grave site of someone who had escaped from enslavement. Her name is Mrs. Nancy Adams. And he wanted to see if we could apply to the National Park Service. They have a special recognition for these sorts of things. And I said, well, tell me more about it. I'd like to learn about this. And so he and two other historians provided information and brought me up to speed. And it was a fascinating story, absolutely fascinating story. And so I got involved with them, and I did some of the work to help them, and we did get the National Park Service recognition for her gravesite. They have sort of it's almost like a special national park where they're trying to locate sites that were part of the Underground Railroad, document them.
It's a national park over in Uxbridge?
Yes. No, the national park.
The national, yeah.
Yeah. And so we worked with them. It took a couple years to get the recognition, but we got that.
And she's buried over there.
She's buried over there, and it's a fascinating story because in fact, give me just a moment here.
Susan brought a lot of great things to hold up and show us all about this.
This is the graveyard where Mrs. Adams is.
He'll tell you exactly, Paul. That's her graveyard.
That's her headstone. It's not the original graveyard where she was buried.
But whose headstone is it?
That is her headstone. What happened is the original graveyard was in a place where they put through Highway 146. And so in the 1990s, they went and surveyed and discovered this graveyard was right in the middle of what was going to be the highway. And so some archaeologists from Boston University came down.
Yeah. They
lifted all the graves in that little graveyard. There's about 31, 32 graves. They took them to Boston University, did archaeological studies on them. But this is the only person whose name we know, because she's the only one that had a headstone that had her name carved on it.
How old was she? What was her birthday?
Her birthday's kind of unknown, and that was true for a lot of people who were enslaved. And she died, her death certificate says she was 100. She was probably 90 to 100 when she died.
9 to 100, and did she died trying to escape?
No, she died in Uxbridge, but she tried to escape 3 times. And
where was she?
She was in Maryland, and the reason we know this is in 2017, just a few years ago,
yeah.
Clements Library at the University of Michigan discovered a letter that she had written telling the story of her life. And she had sent that to abolitionists.
My God, so this lady was trying to escape in the Underground Railroad from Maryland. I wonder for how many years she tried.
It was for years. She was young and married, had 3 small children in the first attempt. This was in Maryland. Yeah. Her slaveholder's wife came to them and said that he was going to sell them to the Spaniards. This is what we know from her letter. And so they went into the woods. They took their children. They lived under an oak tree. They were eating what they could find in the woods, and they were there for at least 5 months.
And where was she at that time?
She was with her children and her husband in the woods, Eventually, the slaveholder decided that he would just sell the whole family for a low price to anybody who could find them. And they were found in the woods, taken into enslavement. Her husband was sold away, and she and her children were put on a boat to the cotton fields near Mississippi. So she was in cotton fields in Louisiana, most likely.
In Louisiana?
In Louisiana for probably 2 or 3 decades.
But what I don't understand is how did they find she knew she was going to have to leave her family. Were the kids old enough to understand that Mommy?
Well, that wasn't that she was sold south. She's still enslaved at this point. So that was the first attempt to escape, and it wasn't successful. It was not successful.
They brought her back again.
They brought her back, separated the family, and sent her to the cotton fields in the south. And again, she worked there for probably, like I said, a couple of decades from what we can see in the records. One of her children, they thought he was trying to escape, and he was whipped with 400 lashes. We know from another letter that she wrote that she was required to do what was called salting and peppering, so she was to salt and pepper the wounds after the whipping of her own child. He was about 19 at the time, probably.
Oh, cool.
She was getting old. We know from the archaeological study that she had a hip injury, and so from the hip injury, she could no longer work in the fields, and so they did something that was called being hired out. And being hired out is when you were sent to work for somebody, and then your wages were sent to your
Like in the house as a maid?
In the house, or as a cook, or something like that. And so that happened, and so she was hired out to a family. Her wages were sent back to the slaveholder, and eventually that person decided to travel in New England. And they actually came to Connecticut. They came to Norwich.
They took her with them?
They took her with them.
To what town here in New England?
In Norwich.
Norwich, okay.
Yeah, so in Norwich. And in Norwich, she managed to escape, and she stayed in an ice house for 2 days.
How did she know where to go? Where to go?
This part she did on her own, so I don't know. But Connecticut at that time in that area had a very large community of free black people and also people who had escaped enslavement. And we know that after that, he did quit looking for her after a while, and she lived in Connecticut for 12 years. So that was the second escape.
How long was she in the ice house? She
was in the ice house for 2 days.
Literally ice house.
Yeah.
How did she?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
We are talking with Susan Franz, and Susan is a professor and an Underground Railroad historian. She's got a lot to tell us. So Susan, anyway, now she has made it from Norwich. Where did she go? Escape to where?
So she was in Norwich for 12 years, became part of the community there. And then she received information that the slaveholder was looking for her again. And this is when she connected with the Underground Railroad.
How did she do that?
So in the Underground Railroad in New England had a couple of pathways. There was one that was north that would go through Boston and Lexington, Concord, that way. And then there was a second pathway that would come up from the seaports, especially from Newport and that area, and it passed through the Blackstone Valley.
But how would she find a path?
So there were people in Connecticut who were connected with the Underground Railroad. She was now connected with the black community, and we know that in Uxbridge, which is where she came to live, that there was Effingham L. Capron, who was an abolitionist. He was a Quaker, and he was a station keeper on the Underground Railroad. And so the most likely way, we don't know exactly the path because she didn't record that, but the most likely path is she was picked up by somebody in Connecticut who Effingham Capron knew and brought to Uxbridge for her own safety.
Is the Quaker church still there in Uxbridge?
It is, and it's a really famous one because that's where Abby Kelly Foster, who was a very famous abolitionist, went as a girl. She went to the meetings there as a girl.
She went to that church?
Yes, she did.
I think it's off of 146A?
It is. It is.
I've seen that so many times, driving by and wondering if it was in existence.
It's still there. They do a Thanksgiving service every year, and they often have open houses and events in the summer. It's not an active meeting anymore, but there is a group that is taking care of it and has done restoration in the building.
I do see some women, I don't know if they're Quakers, but I've seen them in the stores. They have the white bonnets on.
I don't think those are Quakers. Most Quakers now don't wear the Quaker dress.
Well, who are they?
That might be the Mennonite community that's in Mendon. Yeah, okay. But they are different. They have different beliefs. And different
Show us your next picture. What is that?
Well, I was taking a look. This is first a map of the Underground Railroad in this area that was prepared in the 1930s by a man named Siebert. And the little marks that are on there, those are locations where we've identified sites related to the Underground Railroad. So you can kind of see the passageways through that. Where the stars are, that's where there's recognition by the National Park Service of sites here in New England.
Actually, where I grew up, wait a minute. Oh, no. Yes, there's the Cape. Cape Cod. There's one near Cape Cod.
Yes.
What town was that?
Sandwich, actually there's several, but Sandwich was one of the landing points.
And there's one up, looks like Foxborough?
They're up the coast there, you can see various ones.
Not far from here. They were places where people would, but when you got there what did they, should knock on the door and say, hi, I'm here to stay? What did they do?
Usually they had a piece of paper that said that they were okay to travel and that they needed help. A lot of these folks couldn't read or write. We know that in Leicester they did use the quilt language, which has been talked about the slave. So they would have a quilt that they would put on the porch indicating that this is a place where you should go and if it was safe to come or if you should wait.
Where would they go, upstairs to a bedroom or in the basement?
In New England, up until about 1850, people could live pretty openly. But after 1850, what we have is the fugitive slave law. And in the fugitive slave law, it made life here, even here, a lot more dangerous. So we see a lot of people going to Canada at this point. And we know in this part of central Massachusetts, there's towns that lost half of their black population.
Why?
Between 1850 and 1860.
Why?
During the time of the Fugitive Slave Act, because they were afraid they would be picked up and taken south.
Where did they go? Why did they die so soon?
Well, no, they went to Canada. They went to Canada.
And they were safe.
Yeah. And then I wanted to show you
and who's this gentleman?
This gentleman right here, actually I'm going to show you this one first. So I looked to see what the Upton connection might be, and I found one. This is from the Liberator newspaper, and these were events held by abolitionists. And there's one scheduled here, this is in 1845 in Upton, by a very famous abolitionist named Charles Lennox Remond.
What was his last name?
Remond, R-E-M-O-N-D.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah. So this is showing that. And right below that, I don't know if you can read it, but it says
Milford.
Is Frederick Douglass was also scheduling events. They traveled together.
So we were a safe place, too, for them to
come.
That
means there's some connections here in Upton. So, we can see from this newspaper that this is connections. And the Remond family was a very famous Salem family. They were station keepers on the Underground Railroad. Frederick Douglass is nationally known, and he and his family were also station keepers.
Susan, here in Upton, what street? You know?
I don't know where the event was held. Yeah, I don't know where the event was held.
We have a lot of history here.
We have a lot of history here. So let me introduce you to Charles Remond and his family.
I had no idea.
So this is him. This is Charles Lennox Remond. He's from a free black family in Salem.
Mm-hmm. And now they were part of the Underground Railroad.
They were key abolitionists, and they were part of the Underground Railroad, both. The people at the top left, those are his parents. It was a free black family. His grandfather was a free black person who served in the Revolutionary War. He was a soldier for like 5 years. That was his mother's father. We have a picture here also of his sister, who was a very famous abolitionist. And at the time, they would not allow girls to go to high school in Salem. Black girls were not accepted at the high school. And she had passed the entrance exam. Her family was very much into education. And eventually she would go to Britain, and then she went to Italy and became a physician. So she was an obstetrician in Italy.
His daughter?
That's his sister.
His sister?
That's his sister.
But what did he do?
And what he did is he was a managing agent for the American Abolition Society. So he was one of the top officers.
Did he get paid? How did he live?
They didn't. They raised money, and it was used for the cause, and so he had some payment that way. He was trained as a barber. That's what his family did. Yeah. But we see him traveling all over the place. We also know that Frederick Douglass named one of his sons for him. So there's a Charles Remond Douglass, who was a son of Frederick Douglass.
Remond, that's the Remond that was in Upton?
That's the same one.
That's the same one?
This is the guy. Yeah. This is the guy who came to Upton to talk about abolition. And so we know he was here. I don't know exactly where, but we know there's an Upton connection with this particular abolitionist who's very famous.
What year was this about?
This would have been 1845.
This church might have been here. This is an old...
The churches were commonly a place where they would meet, so that is entirely possible.
Oh my God. Did the churches ever shelter them?
Some did, and some didn't. So we see that.
Susan, if anybody would like to have you come and speak and do a presentation, how can they reach you?
The easiest way to reach me is at mirawebdesign@gmail.com, and I'll spell it out, MIRAWEBDESIGN @gmail.com. And I should have gotten a shorter email. I really should.
That's okay.
But that's the easiest way to reach me.
I asked her what Myra means. What does it mean, M-I-R-A?
Mira it's mira. It's a Spanish word which means look. It's the same root as miracle or wonder in English. But yeah, I just wanted something a little different. So
Now, you went to college in California. Briefly, you majored in linguistics.
well, I went to college at the University of Utah. That was where I did my undergraduate.
Utah. Okay.
And it's been a kind of a long journey. When I was young, I worked in a hospital. I studied pre-med. I thought I was going to go that way. And then when my late 20s, the internet was invented, and I went to technology. And so in those days, it was very lucky. If you could spell the word computer, they would probably give you a chance. And I could do that.
Did you have any idea you would end up interested in Underground Railroad?
It was a long road. So I worked for a large tech firm in Boston. That's how I ended up here initially. So I did that. I developed a health issue, and the kind of hours that you do in tech were not agreeing with me anymore. So I decided not to continue that, but I had done it for many, many years.
You have done a lot.
I have.
Yeah.
And then I started teaching at that point and got my master's and continued. And
What were you
my
teaching?
initial field is not history. I was teaching design and technology. So I would teach people how to
Technology.
program, or I would teach people art. And I mostly worked in 2 departments when I was
What kind
teaching.
of technology?
Things like game design, web programming,
Yeah.
very different from all this.
Very different.
And then in the winter of 2015 kind of did me in. You maybe remember that was a horrible winter with snow, up to the rooftops essentially.
Yeah.
And I was commuting to Boston at that time where I was teaching. And after that winter, I had a long talk with myself and said, I don't think I want to commute to Boston anymore.
No.
So I retired from that, and I got interested in local politics. And so I became a member of the select board there. I've been on the finance committee a couple
At
of
Uxbridge?
times in Uxbridge. There was an activism element to it. We had a firm that was dumping what we call dirty dirt, in the area, and so we got involved. We did stop that, so I got interested in how town government worked and that.
Did somebody there mention Underground Railroad and got your interest?
That's what happened. So a gentleman by the name of Michael Pataski, who was a local historian, approached me when I was on the board, and he was the one who asked if I would help with the submission to the National Park Service, which I did. And that's 7 years now that I've been involved with this.
You found your star, I think.
This has been wonderful. I'm totally fascinated by it.
And you're too young to be retired.
Well, thank you. I'm not, but thank you.
Well, these days, people are working in their 80s,
Yeah.
70s, 80s.
Well, I could probably do this till my 70s or 80s.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
so,
Why not?
yeah.
Now, what else is that picture right there?
Okay.
That looks like a manifest from a boat.
Let me show you this one. This one, remember, I said in the 1850s things got worse in New England. And that's because this was when the 1850 Fugitive Slave Law was passed. And up until that point, New England was very protective of people. If they made it here, they generally were pretty safe. They could live openly. They just lived their lives. And the southern states were furious about this because they wanted to come up and they wanted to retrieve people. And so they passed a law in Congress which meant that if you were missing someone and wanted to hunt for them, you could come into New England, you could point at a person and say, "You're my slave, I'm taking you back." And with the new law, they couldn't go before a judge. All you had to do was sign a piece of paper, and they could throw you on a
What
boat
year
and
was
take
this?
you south. This is 1850. So what happened in 1850 is we have this, which is what's called a vigilance society.
Wow.
And the vigilance societies basically came to protect people. So we know of cases where they took people out of courtrooms and put them into carriages and then whisked them off on the Underground
Did they
Railroad.
put them in shackles?
Well, the people who were taking them to court did.
Oh.
So we see this sort of thing. So there was a vigilance society, and it wasn't just here, but communities all over the Midwest and the Northeast were banding together to do this. In New Bedford, there was a large community down there that was absolutely terrified that they were just going to be kidnapped. So
And so that's the listing.
and this is the listing of some of the people that were helped by this, and some of them are very famous cases, but they kept marvelous records, so you can actually see the names, you can see where people went, and we know people like Charles Riemann and many other people were involved in these activities. So there was an organization here in New England to protect these people when that law changed.
Sure.
And people have said that one law is probably what led up to the Civil War.
And there's one right behind it. That's that one.
Yeah, this is talking about that fugitive slave law.
So the one you just talked about.
Yeah, the one I just talked about.
Yeah, the fugitive slave law.
In 1850. And like I said, when we see our black population decrease in some communities in New England, and we see very prominent abolitionists moving their own families. So
Sure.
Harriet Tubman took her family to Canada at this time.
Sure.
We know that, other people were, like Sojourner Truth. She took her family to Michigan to get away from these slave catchers who were trying to, come into New England where it had been pretty safe and make it not safe anymore.
We're talking with Susan Franz, and Susan is a professor. She's an Underground Railroad historian, and she knows her stuff. Susan, where else have you spoken besides in Uxbridge? Where else would you like to go? If somebody would like to have you do a presentation, how far would you be willing to travel in this area?
I have traveled a lot. I've traveled to historical societies around the area. I teach courses in this
Right next
at
to us.
Assumption College.
Yeah.
They have a program there called WISE, Worcester Institute for Senior Education, and I teach courses there, which are Zoom courses.
How about libraries?
I have spoken at libraries. I've spoken at senior centers. And some of these talks, many of these talks have been taped and are now
Because
available.
I have afterwards, I have a thought exactly where I would love to see you, because you have a person there who was involved in this in Upton, and how interesting. Before we close, again, how can they reach you?
So again, the easiest way to reach me is mirawebdesign@gmail.com.
Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't know that much about the Underground Railroad in half an hour. That's a lot. And I'm sure, how long do your presentations go for? Maybe an hour?
I've done from half an hour to 90 minutes. It
Any question?
just depends on I always open for questions.
Yeah.
We even have put together a school program, our elementary kids, the 5th graders, we have a chat with them because there are so many local things. It's very nice. I can talk to the elementary kids and point at places in our community that are related to that. We even took the senior center bus out one day and had a little tour, so it's fun.
I wish they had done that when I was back in school. Very, very important. I think we had one black girl in our class. I think she graduated with us, but only one. Only one. We didn't think anything of it. We were a very open community, and Susan, hi Sue, I think it was Susan, Carol Cotman. Hi Carol, if you're still watching. She was a very sweet person, very nice, but she's all I remember of that. It's interesting.
There's a saying that Black history is American history, and American history is Black history. And so if we're not talking about these things, we're missing half the story.
We are, definitely.
We're missing half the story. And I'm working on a book right now which will bring the threads together in New England of Black history, Native American history, and white history.
You're writing a book?
I am doing that at the moment.
So. When do you think that might be done?
I'm guessing another year before.
Let me know. We'll get
Okay.
you on the show. We have many authors on the show.
Oh, thank you.
And
Okay.
I work also as a publicist, and I help them get out there to the different places to speak and sign and sell. It's been wonderful. We've had Susan Franz with us, and hopefully we're going to have you back on again sometime. This would be really, really good. I mean, it's a subject that covering in half an hour is quite the stunt. Thanks for coming, Susan.
Thank
Say
you for
hi to
inviting
Uxbridge
me.
for me.
Will do. Will do.
See you next time and be my guest.
Riding on a shooting star, heading out toward a dream. Tomorrow's even closer than it seems.